Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowden Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette. And our special guest today is Hal Newman. Hal, thank you for being here. For people who don't know, you work with Urgences-santé in emergency medical services for many, many years. You now run a thing called The Last Ambulance, which talks about those kinds of services in Quebec. And you're here today not to promote that, you're here to cover something that I don't think most Quebecers know is actually happening in the healthcare system. There's been so much focus on Bill 2, dealing specifically with doctors. There's another bill, Bill 7, ostensibly again dealing with healthcare, but it does involve Urgences-santé. You brought this up to me on the radio a week or so ago. Fill people in as to what is in this, because what we know now, I think, Tom Mulcair just wrote a piece about transplants, which will be affected by this bill. How does it affect Urgences-santé?
So Bill 7 is the forced amalgamation of a number of health organizations, and Urgences-santé is in that mix. And so Santé Québec will take over, God help us, will take over Urgences-santé in terms of governance. Reading through all of the articles of the law, it seems unclear as to do the employees, the paramedics and emergency medical dispatchers, do they become employees of Santé Québec? What happens in terms of day-to-day governance, what happens in terms of strategic oversight, what happens in terms of input from, Urgences-santé provides emergency prehospital care for Montreal and Laval. So it would be controlled out of Quebec City, wiping out its board.
So you'd lose all local control.
Absolutely.
So that means you call Urgences-santé and you'll be speaking to someone in Quebec City rather?
No, so the dispatch center, so their emergency communication center and their paramedics will remain here.
Correct.
Our problem will be that, so Urgences-santé is got a kind of a fragile existence at the best of times.
Right.
It's an organization that's had its struggles over the years. Finally, they have a good board in place. The board chose a new PDG, Director General, Michel Garceau, a really good guy. Geez, things were looking up there for about 5 weeks. And then here comes this new projected law that'll wrest control of Urgences-santé away. So governance, really, not day-to-day operations, although we're not quite sure about that even.
Well, how will that impact our services for Urgences-santé in Montreal or Laval, as you pointed out, could be a problem?
Yeah, so the big problem is really like someone in Quebec City do they have an intimate knowledge of the issues facing Montreal? Can they make predictions on how to best serve our population? My mom's a client here. She's 93 years old. She's what paramedics refer to as a frequent flyer. Actually, 92. Sorry, Ma. And does it worry me that she's in a CLSC where the people who will be doing the projections as to how many paramedics we need on the road, how many ambulances we need on the road, will be in Quebec City in an organization whose organogram doesn't even have anything called pre-hospital care, that couldn't find their way out of an ambulance if it was parked on a street with the back doors open. Sorry, I find it so incredible that to target an emergency pre-hospital care system that's focused on Montreal and Laval, it's really unconscionable.
I'm trying to understand, typically these decisions, and obviously the one with Bill 2 with doctors, has to do at the end of the day with money. I know the government says it's for efficiency's sake, but we know that there's a money factor involved in here. And I think you mentioned something, $35 million is what they look to save?
So the line from the minister when she announced this projected bill, projected law, was that they would have a one-time saving of $35 million by wiping out 212 positions.
Right.
Interestingly, I wrote about this, is that if Urgences-santé, if all ambulance services, if the government would increase the base rate for ambulance transports, which hasn't been adjusted since 1997, if they raised it by $100, right? And remember, the vast majority of us don't pay. That comes out of insurance. So if it was $100 increase in the base rate, the annuity would be about $40 million a year for
For people who didn't just hear you, say that again. The base rate when you call Urgences-santé, has not changed in 27 years?
Correct. That's across the province. And so if you look at the rate, the base rate for an ambulance transport, so that doesn't take into account the increase in the cost of materials, the increase in the cost of paying for paramedics, the increase in the cost of diesel or gas, depending on the vehicles, all of the equipment that goes into them. We've had no adjustments. So, and if you look at, so if in Calgary, for instance, you call an ambulance, and even if you're not transported, it's $250. It's a straight fee. Here it's $125 plus, I think it's 75 cents a kilometer. Mm-hmm. So it's actually more expensive to take a cab per kilometer, I think. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, too, you mentioned Calgary. What about in parts of the rest? I mean, how far behind are we as far as the rest of the country is concerned? What is it in Toronto? What is it in Vancouver? What does it cost?
The costs vary. There are kind of co-pays, if you will. Like it's a flat rate in Toronto of $80, but it's because OHIP has a co-pay. So
not really fair to compare necessarily.
It's squids and potatoes, really.
Okay. But as you said, had there been any kind of an increase, that would probably have wiped out or come close to wipe out the alleged savings that are going to come from what the government's planning to do.
Right. So if you increase the base rate for an ambulance transport across Quebec, never mind just for Montreal and Laval, that's about 250,000 transports a year.
Wow.
You do the math.
Wow.
I mean, it's an incredible number. And if you only reinvested a part of that in the system itself, you could pay your paramedics more. You could invest in education. You could invest in better gear. You could, on and on.
Yeah.
I can't speak highly enough about the work Urgences-santé does. The paramedics who've dealt with them on occasions, broken ankles, broken legs, so on and so forth. And yet, while so much focus, deservedly so, is placed on doctors for what they're going through, Urgences-santé paramedics have had to deal with all sorts of labor issues, and they're still dealing with them and don't get the same kind of attention, and certainly not the respect from the government. And that's like criminal, I think, on a whole other level.
It's actually really bizarre. So it's been at least 2 years now that they've been in this drawn-out, torturous negotiations, where the latest offer from the government, you'll really enjoy this, is a $4 an hour cut in pay.
I heard this.
Because they, apparently, according to the CAC, paramedics aren't worth as much as we pay them, so we should reduce their pay. Needless to say, morale is in the toilet. You just need to read The Last Ambulance on a weekly basis to see the letters of despair that I receive from paramedics. And something that I don't really share publicly, but I'll share with you, is that every week I receive several texts from paramedics who need an intervention by a psychologist. They write they're suicidal. They're completely burnt out. They don't know how they're going to, they're working 2 and 3 jobs. They've got young families. They can't make ends meet. And they write, it's heartbreaking. They write these texts, and sometimes it's intensely serious, where, they're writing, I'm on the edge of the bridge. I'm calling to say goodbye.
And what brings us, is this the working conditions? I mean, what sort of goes into this when they arrive at a point like that in their lives?
Yeah, sure. Look, you got to look at the conditions. So it's bad for paramedics right across the province. The average career expectancy now, so when I became a paramedic in 79, 80, it was a lifer type thing. You became a paramedic, you figured you'd retire as a paramedic. The average career expectancy of a paramedic in Quebec now is 5 years. Then they stop and reinvent themselves. So we give them this world-class education, a 3-year CEGEP program with hundreds, thousands of hours of stages, of internships. And then 5 years later, they're like, I can't do this anymore. So there's no work-life balance. That's mythological. So starting a family, forget about it. I mean, just recently we went through the debacle of breastfeeding moms being forced back to work. It's nonstop. So, for instance, yesterday, if we're focusing on Montreal and Laval, yesterday afternoon, there's a scale of emergency, an internal emergency system called the MAP, and it goes to a maximum of MAP 4. Well, yesterday they spent hours at map 3, which meant that there were emergency calls backed up. And so, and while that sounds scary enough, then you need to consider the paramedics and the emergency medical dispatchers. So they're scrambling, trying to handle all of these calls, and it's non-stop.
What's the solution to this? I mean, you're describing a situation. I don't think most people realize just how bad it is. And I don't think most people realize, too, as you just said, that for Urgences-santé workers, this battle has been going on now for a couple of years with the government to try to change things. What's the solution? What needs to change here? What do you want to see have happen?
Man, I would love if we had like in every other province and in every other jurisdiction in the world, if we had someone who led emergency pre-hospital care in this province who could say, hey, this is my vision for the next couple of years. Can't do that. I keep asking. They don't like me at the ministère. I keep asking, what's your vision? You know, do you have a plan? There is no plan. It's like we're a drunk and we stumble from bar to bar, and we're you know, I'm 65. I think I've lived through 25 committees or 25 sets of recommendations that haven't been taken, tens of millions of dollars spent on them. What would I like to see? I'd like to see a cohesive emergency medical system, just like Ontario, just like every other province and territory in Canada. You know, my wife and I go to Costa Rica every year. It's our escape for a couple of weeks in the winter. And people refer to, you know, Costa Rica, Central America, it's the third world. You know, I stopped at a car accident last year in Costa Rica to lend a hand. The third world's got a better emergency pre-hospital care system than we do.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the home of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen. What's the rationale from the government here for not doing this? And it's obviously not just this government.
No, it's been
Ongoing.
Yeah, it's an ongoing shit show. I don't know if you can say that, but there you go.
It's okay.
It's an ongoing saga for 40 years now of kicking it down the road.
And yet you can always count on Urgence, what kind of, in terms of work stoppages, strikes, you don't hear. They're there, despite signs on the...
So paramedics and emergency medical dispatchers are an essential service. So
right.
We can say things like we're on strike, but
right.
It's an administrative strike. And frankly, paramedics and emergency medical dispatchers, we knew it was going to be tough when we chose the profession. It's our gig. It's our calling. And so, despite the insanity, we still go.
Yeah.
The problem now is we're still answering the call. I'm not anymore, but the paramedics who are on the road, they're still answering the call to their own detriment. The sacrifices their health, the health of their family, their relationships. And why does the government not act? I've been asking that on your show for a while now. I have no idea. You know, there are only 55...
But is it a lack of respect? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, there's an absolute lack of respect.
But why? I mean, it was like that with nurses, teachers in this province until various unions got involved and there was a little more respect. But you still don't get... I speak to paramedics. I've known paramedics. And they talk about the bottom of the barrel, in terms of treatment, in terms of respect. I'm not talking about from the population, but from government areas. There's a lack of appreciation.
There's a total lack of respect, a total lack of understanding of the value of a paramedic and emergency medical dispatcher. It's really important to group the two. It's incredible. I've tried to figure out what the political motivation is of ignoring and neglecting. There are only 5,500 paramedics in
right.
Quebec, so why target this particular group for such disdain? During the pandemic, we were the ange gardien,
right.
And then the pandemic, and then paramedics were doing vaccinations. Retired paramedics went back to work in CLSCs to take care of people. And then the pandemic ended, and we went from heroes to zeros.
Right.
Yeah.
Put this into perspective. I mean, people talk about wages. what's a good wage for a paramedic, or what's the range of wage? Because I was shocked when someone gave me an answer.
So this is brutal. So a top-end paramedic in Quebec earns a little less than an entry-level paramedic in Ontario.
And what would that be?
It's about 46 an hour. It's mind-blowing, really. So John Abbott, the CJEP, John Abbott College, they have a pre-hospital care paramedic program. And a lot of their paramedics end up working just across the line in Ontario. A lot of the guys from Côte St. Luc EMS, where I was the director, we exported all of our medics. They're in Leeds, they're in Peel, they're in Toronto, they're in York. I mean, I go to Toronto and I can wave at an ambulance and see someone I know from Montreal. We're a great exporter of paramedics. Go down to Broward County.
My point is, this is not a career that people go into for the money.
No.
If they wanted to go in it for the money, they'd be an STM driver.
Right.
No,
right.
you know what?
So-
I don't want to. I find that that's a bad trap for us to go into, where we knock down other professions.
Well, I'm not knocking it down. I'm just saying we had a story last week suggesting that STM drivers, on average, take home, I think that number from Raphael Melanson published this. It was a La Presse article, $120,000, including overtime, including everything else, but $120,000.
Well, good for them.
Yeah,
I
great.
wish paramedics would have
Sure.
that. Oh, so Di and I have been married going on, I think, 33 years. And I remember, and Arnie Zweig was my best man. And his speech when we got married was, clearly you know your husband's not going to be wealthy because he's chosen to be a paramedic.
As opposed to him, who's a stockbroker.
He was a paramedic at the time, go figure. Yeah, he chose the right path.
Why did you, when you worked like front line, and this was your passion?
It's still my passion.
Why did you get out?
I didn't really, actually. I just had parallel paths. So I grew up in a family of writers, and I started the path into EMS and fire when I was like 17, 18. But my parents had said, you need to have a plan B. You need to go to college. So I ended up did my undergrad in Bethany, West Virginia. It's like Bethany College, as far as you can get it from Montreal, still be on this planet, at a Disciples of Christ College, where I did my degree in journalism. I always had that parallel shot, and all through my career. So I worked as a paramedic firefighter in West Virginia. I went to grad school in Baltimore, worked as a paramedic firefighter in Baltimore. Then I worked as an emergency management analyst for the U.S. government, but always involved with paramedics. But I always made sure I had that parallel run, which paid the mortgage a lot of times.
To what we were talking about before, this idea going back to the beginning of the government deciding on this bill that, control would rest with Quebec City. We're seeing this happen. I mean, Santé Québec, and I understand the line about, oh no, we're going to be under the guise of Santé Québec actually knowing what's going on here. We had the same thing happen in hospitals. You have people on the front line, on the ground, who know what's going on, being controlled by a group in Quebec City who don't. So this is now going to happen, it would seem, to Urgences-santé. You mentioned you had a board of directors. This board is now being eliminated under this bill?
Right. I just want to say I don't represent Urgences-santé, so I don't work with them anymore. So the board of directors was informed after the minister announced
made the decision
that they would be dissolved. I believe April 1st, and they'll be wiped out as a. So Santé Québec, it's the dashboard organization. I think Lagacé wrote about it this morning. I think that's what my wife said as I was heading out the door. But the Dubé is the dashboard minister. I don't have my tableau in front of me. And that's what Santé Québec's about. We put up select data on a dashboard somewhere, and they go, everything's great. Mm-hmm. We have the debacle of
Transplant Quebec.
Yeah, Transplant Quebec. We have our Minister of Health 2 years ago in the National Assembly answers a question and says, I don't have my dashboard in front of me, but I can tell you, and you should all be assured, that the average response time for a critical emergency for an ambulance anywhere in Quebec is 9 minutes. I'm like, dude, what kind of drugs are you taking? Like even in Montreal, that isn't true. So imagine in Shefford, and imagine you live out in Chibougamau. You think an ambulance is coming in 9 minutes? Like you can exhale now. And so that's the deal. So with Santé Québec, we'll have control with people who are looking at some slice of data somewhere, and they'll assure us, and they'll say, Aaron, everything's good.
And how much money they think they're saving?
In total, they said that they're going to save a total of $35 million.
And this province, which does so well on
Yeah.
investments and saving money, yeah.
What does this do for the regions? We're talking about Montreal and Laval. Obviously, that's where most of the work is. What does this do for
40%.
the rest of the province?
Yeah, so 40% of the calls for the entire province
Are here.
of Quebec are handled by
Okay.
Urgences-santé, so we're talking a significant system. And here's where it's really interesting. So outside of Montreal and Laval, it's a hodgepodge, a dog's breakfast of private companies, co-ops, and nonprofits, and none of them are being targeted by this. So if you make money, because Urgences-santé is not a profit-generating institution, it's a parapublic. But hey, if you're making money, we're going to leave you be. So we'll have two systems for emergency pre-hospital care. We'll have one for Montreal and Laval, and one for the rest of the province.
I speak to a lot of doctors, and they say, above everything else, their commitment is their passion. And I know that from your experience as a paramedic, you've saved lives, you've been in a lot of very serious health situations, like dealing with, and that's what kind of probably stands out most over everything else. I'm guessing that the work in itself, I mean, is very, very rewarding on a whole other level that nobody can, you do save lives. You do bring...
You know, we do save lives. I would say, though, that the most rewarding part is being a paramedic is getting to be able to practice the art and science of caring. And so caring and saving aren't mutually exclusive.
Right.
And I feel like we need to remind people that because our healthcare system is so dysfunctional, that paramedics have become the gate of last resort. So people call 911 because they don't have access to a doctor.
Yeah.
And now with Law 2, they really won't have access. I saw the announcement about the GMS for the whole western part of Montreal closing
Come April 1st.
come April 1st. So they don't have access to a doctor. They go on 811 and they wait for an hour, and then they say you have to go to the ER, but they don't have a way to get to the ER because there are multiple obstacles. And so they call paramedics. And paramedics, so a big part of our job is actually taking care of people who can't get care elsewhere. And I'd say that the most rewarding work that I did as a paramedic was I worked in a palliative care program, and I also worked in a community care program. And you're seeing people in a non-emergency setting, but I hope we made a real difference. That's my hope.
I want to wrap. We have to wrap up. I just want to ask. People are going to see this and go, "I can't believe this is happening or going to happen." Is there something that the public can do?
Yeah. So this is something that I don't understand how come Valerie Plante wasn't more involved in, but we have a new mayor in Montreal. I would say if I would lived in Montreal, I would call your elected reps and say, get on this. We can't afford to lose control of our own emergency pre-hospital care system. That's really the answer. These people need to step up. Mulcair is writing about it, but it needs to be mayors. There needs to be municipal involvement. They have to stand up and say, what the hell is going on here?
We'll leave it at that. Hal, I want to thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks so much for
And,
the opportunity.
and hopefully there'll be some good news coming out of
Yes.
this.
I hope.
That wraps up another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here at the Stoughton Dell. We'll see you again soon.